So this next video is gonna be quite simple. I think it's gonna be fast also because also I'm basing myself on the last exercise and I'm just gonna add the new thing. So basically what we're gonna do now is make the possibility for the cycle to don't end. So if we start here, we could start it for like one time or start it for a continuous cycle. And kind of like an automation. So basically, when you want to do that, the process is quite always the same, which is the one I'm circling down. So I cheated and already uploaded the model, but now I'm gonna explain everything that's happening here so you can understand which are the steps. So basically, when we start our cycle, it moves and it does all the positions of valves, it moves the actuators, and it goes giving pressure line by line, taking off the other line. And what we want to do if we want to continue the cycle is make sure that when the last position happens, so on our case is when we have a minus, which is a sensor that we're not using yet, which is good, we're going to trigger the first step again, so a plus. So basically, if we want to make it possible to move the one-time cycle and the continuous cycle, we're going to need to add a logic that allows both of them to activate our circuit. So you're probably thinking of an OR valve, and that's exactly what we're going to add. So we're going to have to do an OR between the two different sensors, not the two different buttons, and one of them is going to be a retention button. I don't know if you remember it from the first video, but it's the button that has a little kind of a little thing in the middle of it and it doesn't come back with the string. It's kind of like, I'm going to take the start off because we know it's starting, but it's basically like this, and it allows the circuit to start, and this valve will stay pressed and it won't come back with the string because that's what we have on the simple actuation button. And what we're gonna have now is an OR valve because either one of these buttons is gonna activate our circuit. So does this make sense? I think it does. Like for me it does, but I don't know if I'm explaining it properly. But what we're gonna do is add an OR valve, which we also learned about on the Lex lectures, and I'm just gonna draw it real quick. 1 second. Okay, so now we have our R valve, which is here, and it means that if you push the one-time cycle button or the or the continuous cycle button, it's gonna activate this outlet here, and we'll have pressure coming. But now what we're gonna make sure is that A minus needs to happen for the cycle to continue. But there's also a thing that if, for example, let's think that this actuator is in this position and the last line was triggered. So here, and it's gonna start coming back because it's gonna activate here and it's gonna start moving the actuator A back to its position. So it's gonna be moving this direction. And then if, for instance, we press the unique cycle button, it could move because there's nothing that it's in the way of this happening. So because we would have pressure in the last line because it was still going and it this pressure wouldn't have been taken off because the first movement is not activated yet, but also it is not in the desired position. So we cannot press the button again until we make sure that the SA minus is activated also. So it's important that we make sure that the SA minus sensor is activated even if we're using the unique cycle. And for the continuous cycle, I think it's pretty logic that we need to have SA minus, because if SA minus is triggered, I'm gonna add it here, just 1 second. So here we have SA minus, and for the continuous cycle to happen, we need to make sure that the last movement happens so we can activate the first one. And what's going to happen is, since this valve has a since this button, sorry, I'm mixing the words. Since this button has a retention, it will always be activated here. So we need to make sure that this pressure line only gives the signal to this and valve here if the the sensor is also activated. So yes, we're gonna have to add another and valve between the signal of SA minus, which is our last movement, and the buttons. So just making a quick review, we also need to connect it to the one time button, because of that problem that we can have, that if the last movement is happening and we press the button again, if it doesn't have this condition of having the last movement sensor activated, it could do something wrong, because it would try to move to A plus while it was still coming back. So it wouldn't be great, because all the pressure would clash and it would probably just stop in the middle. So it's good to have this condition also from the one time cycle. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna draw the valve and I'll come back. Okay, so now we can see here that we have the signal from the buttons, which will be on if either one of the buttons is pressed, and this signal will be transmitted to our initial end valves that make sure that the last line has pressure, which we already tackled on the last videos, so it's nothing new. And this will only be delivered there if the last movement sensor is pressed. So now we just connect it, and voila, that's it. And also another thing that we have to make sure is that since the initial position is in SA minus, we need to make sure that this sensor is pressed. So here, that's it. And just a quick review of the method. What we have is, we're always gonna have something looking like this if we're gonna have the continuous cycle and the one-time cycle. So we have the one-time button, which is this one, and the retention button. If we press the one-time button, yes, okay, it will it will shift like this for a moment, and then it will come back. So at some point, there won't be any pressure coming here. So when the last movement sensor is triggered, like this, for example, when it reaches SA minus on our case, it's gonna deliver pressure here. But since there's no pressure coming from the left, it will not activate the cycle to continue. But on the other hand, if we have this thing, not moving everything, but you can understand, it's gonna be pressed like this during the whole thing. So it will always have compressed air coming from the left, and when it reaches the SA minus again, so when the last movement is triggered, it's gonna activate another cycle. So the second cycle, the third, and until you decide that it's time to press this thing again. So I made a mess here, but yeah, that's it. So basically, this it's what it's always going to look like. So an R valve between the normal button and the retention button, and an AND valve between the output of the R valve and our last movement. And then the output of this AND valve is gonna be an input for the AND valve that we always have that make sure that the last line has pressure. So that's it. And then it's gonna restart the cycle or start it for the first time if we're just using this bit. I'm not sure if I complicated it, but that's what it's supposed to be, and it's always going to look like this.